Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to the Estuate webinar series. My name is Mark Hebert. I'm the COO of Estuate. Today we've got a very topical agenda titled Using Hadoop for Enterprise Data Management. Let me introduce our speakers. I'll be moderating, and I'm happy to have two good friends from the IBM Optim product management organization with me, Peter Costigan and Jeff Tuck, with whom I've worked quite a bit over the years. And they both drive a lot of the product development roadmap and strategy for Optim. Here's our agenda. I'm going to set up the topic for us by talking about latest trends in Hadoop and what we're seeing within the IBM community and the partner community around information lifecycle governance and data management as challenges in Hadoop environments. After that, I'll hand it over to Peter, and he's going to talk about Hadoop as a tool for test data management in the whole area of testing and quality management, and how IBM Optim fits in with Hadoop in that regard. After that, we'll hand it over to Jeff Tuck, and we'll talk about the whole area of archiving data using Hadoop, and then we'll move into a summary and question and answer. Okay, let me set up the topic for today. We are seeing many IBM clients and other of our clients adopting Hadoop. Many of them are still doing it in a sandbox environment, but more and more we're seeing implementations with a serious amount of data based on Hadoop for serious analytic applications, and we expect that is going to grow dramatically in the coming years. As a result, Hadoop is really becoming a standard for analytics, and as we've seen just recently with IBM and its Spark announcement, that platform is going to become a standard for analytics along with Spark, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. As a result, with serious data in these Hadoop systems, the issue of management of data and information governance now starts to become much more important and is starting to take center stage. No longer is it just a sandbox, but we actually have to start worrying about things like security, the privacy of data, the need to manage that data through to the end of its life cycle based on compliance and corporate data retention policies. It's starting to become a serious platform that needs serious information governance. So as a result, we're starting to see now Hadoop become a very interesting platform in the whole quality management process as a tool for managing test data, as a staging ground for deploying and provisioning test data, and a very powerful tool at that. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit next with Peter. We also expect fairly soon that Hadoop will likely become the repository of choice for data archiving as information goes through to the end of its life cycle in the corporate environment. And so Jeff will talk a little bit about where we are in IBM and with Optim in thinking about Hadoop for data archiving and what the plans are in that regard in future years. And then lastly, what we see is Hadoop itself, not only as a repository for test data management and data archiving, but it itself needs to be governed. The data within it needs to be managed, it needs to be provisioned for testing and development purposes, and it needs to be managed as a data store. So IBM Optim is becoming a platform of choice for Hadoop, and we'll talk a little bit more now about what that means in the current context with IBM and the Optim platform. I'm going to hand it over to Peter now, and he'll talk about test data management with Hadoop and Optim next. Peter?
Thank you, Mark. So I'm not having luck seeing the slides change on my screen. I'm going to keep talking here, assuming that you guys are able to stay with me on the slides.
Okay.
So I'm on slide number 5, and talking about Optim test data management. I just wanted to level set everybody with with what we're talking about here as far as Optim test data management and data privacy. We'll talk about them first. Then when Jeff comes on, he'll give you a quick overview on what is archiving before we talk in more detail about what we're doing on the Hadoop platform. So just one quick slide on what is test data management. And this slide gives you an overview of the major components. The two core technologies are right in the middle there. They're subsetting and masking. So these are best practices for managing test data that we have evolved over many years in the test data management business. They address key requirements for customers doing test data management, really starting with the old way of battle days, the battle ways of doing things where customers just copied full clones of production data and did testing with that. You know, what Optim test data management provides is the ability to create useful subsets of related data, extract them from production or from a production clone, apply masking to them so that the data is sensitive data is protected, but at the same time so that referential relationships, related data relationships are maintained. Those two technologies sort of are at the core of what test data management allows you to do. So it lets you get a right-size subset, mask it, and then on the front end of this process, we have tools to help with discovering the data model, which is really required for us to be able to do a meaningful subset. We have to understand the relationships in the data. But along with that, we have a tool that at the same time will help you discover where your sensitive data is located and help identify proper volumes of test data, et cetera. So that's on the front end, and on the back end, we provide tools that allow you to very quickly and easily do extractions from production, masking, you know, run the whole process, and then quickly refresh test data multiple times. And then we automate the ability to do comparisons, either between production and stored results or between two live databases, or a very flexible compare tool also, which is quite useful in this scenario. So this is the Optim test data management solution that we're talking about. It applies to many environments from the mainframe to across distributed platforms. I'm going to move on to slide number 6 and talk briefly then about what is data privacy or masking. We just mentioned it briefly on the previous slide, but it is a standalone solution and it has its own sort of underlying technology. This technology, the goal of it is here on this slide, as you can see, to de-identify sensitive information. But it's absolutely critical that we provide realistic fictional data, but realistic fictional data, so that, especially so that relationships are maintained in the database. So we provide some options in the masking process. It's not really rocket science. There is some science to it. So for example, you're looking at a credit card number here, and we need to be aware, our technology is aware of the components of a credit card number, for example, that the issuer, the Visa is identified by some of the initial digits on the left-hand side, and that there's a check digit on the right. And you know, when you go to mask a Visa to Visa, even if you would prefer the option of random masking, you probably want the same issuer. You probably want a Visa card rather than a random card from perhaps another country. So you know, we'll preserve, even with a request for a random credit card number, we'll give you a Visa card if your input was a Visa card, and we'll give you the correct check digit, for example. So, you know, again, not rocket science, but there is some science to it. And then underlying that, we also provide masking capabilities for repeatable, unique. So if there's a list of unique Visa cards on the left-hand side, or credit cards of any kind, we'll guarantee you unique values that are repeatable and can be done anywhere in your enterprise. So what you get is a cross-enterprise consistent masking with those options. So this obviously addresses many requirements in the area of regulatory the legal, regulatory, and company regulatory requirements in terms of guaranteeing privacy to our customers. So these are the two solutions, test data management and data privacy. Let's move on to slide number 7. Slide 7 talks about the test data management being and masking being leveraged in a Hadoop environment. And what we see, of course, are the benefits of Hadoop being passed through to Optim. We see the ability to scale and be more cost-effective in your use of storage, and to leverage the scalability of Hadoop to really grow into extremely large volumes of data. It helps to provide a trusted environment or to improve on the data privacy characteristics of the solution that our customers are offering. By masking the sensitive data, we typically recommend that you mask the data on the way in, or perhaps if sort of as a secondary best practice, perhaps on the way out of a big data environment and back into the test environment. Both of those approaches are possible. It's also possible to use Optim data privacy with other technologies like our ETL tool, IBM's ETL tool, DataStage, to actually mask the data inside of Hadoop. So that's possible, but again, we consider best practices really to be masking the data before it gets there if you don't have a lot of control over your Hadoop environment. And many customers we find are in that mode in their relatively early acceptance of Hadoop. So we typically recommend masking on the way in. So this provides a trusted area or a protected area, an area which has been masked, so that your users can access the data, can process it, can get useful results, but protects privacy. It's also obviously open, takes advantage of all the Hadoop open environment characteristics. And so let's move on to talk about slide number 8. So what's the what actually happens here is that we've provided a fully functional test data management offering capability for Hadoop. It's like any ordinary Optim data source that's fully supported. We support Hive specifically as a source and target for data. So a typical use case is a customer has data in a production database, in perhaps a relational database, Oracle on a workstation or DB2 on a mainframe, extracts data from that environment, can place it into Hive, can have Optim maintain information about it in Hadoop. Things like primary keys and relationships. Optim will continue to remember those things because Optim has its own directory that keeps track of these that's sort of business as usual for Optim to maintain primary keys and relationships between tables. We can maintain the other standard Optim artifacts, which are how to access the data and how to transform the data as it's being moved from one place to another. So, for example, if your data model has changed from a previous release that's under test data management to a new one, we let you map the old data to the new data model quite easily. So all the standard tools for test data management are in place there. And then we have a new load service available specifically for Hadoop. There are certain limitations or differences in how the product behaves in a Hadoop or Hive environment, just due to the limitations that are in place in that Hadoop environment. But generally, you have a full function test data management and data masking solution. We also give you the ability to browse some edit, again, subject to Hive limitations, comparing data, and obviously the ability to create these objects inside of Hadoop that are similar to the ones that are in the source production databases. So moving on to slide number 9, this sort of repeats the idea that the business objectives here that we're trying to accomplish are to allow customers to move that test data into a Hive or Hadoop environment and to do analytics if necessary, to do very large volume subsetting. Sometimes, by the way, customers, this definition of subset is not always something that's smaller. You can use Optim to create a larger volume of data than the production, which sometimes for some customers is desirable as they want to test their systems to see if they'll handle future workloads a couple of years down the road or what have you. So, so basically, the objective here is to provide a Hadoop environment that supports test data management tasks. And you get more really bang for your buck in this Hadoop environment because you have the Optim directory keeping relationship information, which actually Hadoop does not do a particularly great job of. Most of that is left to the user. Even in the Hive environment, there aren't referential integrity constraints that can be defined. And so Optim provides this awareness of application relationships, which is valuable. So where you see the word catalog on this slide, that refers to two things. That refers to cataloged in Hadoop. So Hadoop is aware of files and the data, but also cataloged in Optim, in the sense that Optim maintains that awareness of what the columns are in terms of perhaps business objects. There may be sensitive columns like credit card numbers that have been identified. Optim maintains the awareness of that. And Optim maintains awareness of relationships between multiple data sources as business as usual for Optim. And so you get sort of you get the best of both worlds with this combination of TDM and Hadoop. So I'm moving on to slide number 10. I'm just showing a quick overview of what the big TDM benefits are. What you get here is the ability to take data out of production, put it into Hadoop. You can mask it on the way in. You can mask it on the way out as preferred, but what we recommend and what we show here on this slide is masking on the way in. You're able to use Hadoop as an ordinary TDM data source. The other thing that's more visible in this slide is the ability to do big insights and other Hadoop query and analytics type operations on the data. So we've had customers do entirely new use cases in terms of analytics within the Hadoop environment to run more complex queries to understand their data, to make sure, for example, some have used it to make sure that their data is a representative sample of the original data by doing some statistical queries. Others who have used it to specifically find multiple solutions to find data that would be useful for test cases that satisfy multiple complex conditions across a big data model that would otherwise require quite a lot of relational DBMS processing, say multiple conditions across a very large, several hundred tables model to pull some specific test cases that satisfy a set of conditions. So the analytics are available there for data in Hadoop at a lower price and faster performance, as well as the standard Optim test data management capabilities. And in order to do the analytics, there's a whole bunch of tooling that's being provided in these big data environments. And so some examples here are the big sheets and big SQL IBM offerings in Big Insights. Those are shown here on this slide as well. So that's an overview of big TDM and data privacy and the benefits that you can derive from using them combined with Optim. I'm now going to turn this over to Jeff to talk about the next slide and archiving. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So slide 11, we start to talk about essentially archive. And for those of you that don't know the solution that well, Optim essentially can connect to various data repositories, and it can consume the data that resides there and put it into an archive file. What's important to note here is that we don't just get the data that's associated with it. We also pick up any of the extended objects that may be in that system, such as any RI that may be enforced within the repository itself, any user-defined functions, any triggers. Essentially, we grab the entire data environment along with the data, and we neatly put that into an archive file. Those archive files can be monitored throughout the life of the data, so that retention can be applied to it and disposition can occur when it needs to. And now in terms of the life cycle, we also see the benefits, of course, in the big data analysis and making that archive data available to big data environments in the larger concepts of doing analysis. Some of the things that I just want to key on before we talk about the movement of data is centered on the concept that the archive file is the system of record for the information. It basically ensures that the data is immutable over a period of time. It guarantees that there will be no changes to that, so it truly is the system of record, an archive or a point-in-time snapshot of any transactions that may have taken place. You can restore that data selectively or holistically if you choose so to do back to the targeted environment. Not only can we move the data, but since we also have all the extended objects such as the triggers and the RI and the UDFs contained within the archive, we can go back and we can recreate a data environment if it's needed at some point in time. We can certainly apply retention to it. We monitor that retention and we'll execute on disposition of the archive data as disposition comes due. We provide utilities so that you can easily locate data and hold information as needed, typically in support of e-discovery and legal hold use cases. And of course, we provide a lot of security around the access to the information as well as the audit capabilities of that data. On slide 13, we are just taking a look at some of the common questions that are beginning to surface in conversations. I don't see a lot of individuals using the Hadoop platform as a system of record for archive data. Very limited, in fact, recognizing what Hadoop is really good for, which is going in and essentially being able to provide analytics across all kinds of information, as well as the redundancy for the storage there. But in terms of becoming a system of record, it just hasn't reached the level of maturity yet that I think can hold an entire life cycle for system of record data. So when you start looking at Hadoop, some of the questions I think you want to ask yourself are listed here. How are access controls going to be imposed? How can you guarantee that the data won't be changed over a period of time? How do you apply common disposition practices to the data? And how do you repeat that? And how do you prove that disposition of the information is repeatable, which basically builds out a defensible disposition strategy for your entity? Moving on to slide 14, I'm going to start to talk about how we actually move data into the Hadoop environment. So this is more of a high-level overview of the entire process. Mark, I think you probably have built out the whole slide there, whereby we're basically taking data from a production database, and we're archiving that information and then purging it from the data store. This results in one or more archive files that are now going to be managed by Optim. Of course, we provide avenues for access to that data. We can do this based on standards, ODBC, JDBC connectivity to an archive file population. We do an awesome job at making this thing look like it is in a relational data store, when in fact it's not. It's more about standards-based access to the data, but we make it look like it is just on any other data repository. Again, the benefits of the archive file are dealing with the retention and hold policies that you may have to follow, being able to maintain the data in an immutable format, ensuring that we have the entire transaction as well as the entire data environment if we need to restore that for some reason. And then, of course, taking the archive data and moving it into Hadoop is something that we've made very easy by virtue of moving the data through CSV files in support of your analytic initiative. So if you look at slide 15, this dives a little bit deeper now into the concept of how do you actually get that data over into a Hadoop platform. And essentially what we do is we take the data archives, and each table that's in the archive file, we can basically convert that into a CSV file that gets moved over into an HDFS system. We basically use an Optim Hadoop loader to do this. The loader is basically leveraging the web HDFS interfaces to move the data into HDFS. And then once it's in HDFS, it's very simple to turn around and expose that data into the Hive catalog so that now you can access it using Hive QL, or in the case of IBM's Big Insights container, Big SQL, to basically go against that data population and access that information. After you've exposed the information into the catalog, you can basically go through and automate this process. So as you're creating archive files, if you need to have that land over in Hadoop, you can automate the process so that a convert request goes right behind the archive. It'll register the file to an HDFS location, which has already been exposed to the catalog system. So that as data is landing in the HDFS system, it should expose itself to any analytics that need to be done. But that is the value for Optim Archive and how we move data into big data environments for analytic initiatives. So Mark, I'll hand it back over to you for slide 16.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and thanks, Peter. That was a whirlwind tour through the platform of Hadoop with IBM Optim. There's clearly a lot of new functionality that's come into play in the last year or two, and I think we'll see actually quite a bit more functionality as the Optim team focuses on building out the Hadoop platform over time. So I think we're still in quite the early stages of execution of Hadoop with information lifecycle governance. I want to just give you a few thoughts on implementation and Estuate's role in all of this. There's a big opportunity among IBM customers for managing your Hadoop data with IBM Optim. Estuate is the premier partner for IBM with Optim. We've had a 7-year relationship around Optim with IBM. We do a lot of product development for Optim, for IBM, all of the Oracle application templates like Oracle eBusiness Suite, Siebel, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, Oracle Retail. Those are all built and maintained by Estuate. We use those in our projects. We have completed over 250 implementations of Optim. Not very many on Hadoop yet, but we actually have done some Hadoop implementations with Big Streams and Big Insights, and so we're starting to move our practice in that direction. A few words about Optim itself. It has long been the dominant platform for enterprise archiving, as well as test data management and data masking. Gartner reports show it in the Magic Quadrant with as high as 76% market share. It's a true platform, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We are starting to see Optim customers playing with Hadoop in their sandboxes and thinking about using Hadoop for test data management and analytics of archive data. So it's an emerging practice area that we're going to see a lot more of, I believe. And Estuate has the right skills to be able to help you in a project like this. Lastly, Optim can be deployed in both an on-premise and a hosted managed service environment. We do provide that service in both scenarios. I think in the early days, we're going to be seeing Hadoop more in the on-premise world, but over time, we expect that to migrate. Let me review a few of the key concepts that Jeff and Peter touched on in their presentations. The Optim platform itself is composed of 5 different products that all are tightly integrated. It's one common engine that's well integrated and can be executed in a centralized environment pointing at multiple applications. We see customers implement that as a routine. Along the top is the discovery product that's used typically against old legacy applications, mostly custom, sometimes packaged where the data model is not well known. It can be used to point at the data in an application and to discover the relationships among the data based on statistical sampling. It does a very good job of suggesting a business model, an enterprise data model, for the application that can be then validated by SMEs. The other four products we've actually talked about during this presentation. On the bottom left are test data management and data privacy. They go hand in hand, and they were the subject of Peter's discussion of Hadoop for test data management, provisioning and masking of that data. And on the lower right are two sister products that are called data growth. I think it's now been renamed as Optim Archive, and then decommissioning, also called Optim Retirement. Those are really a common engine, and they're used for the archiving process that Jeff talked about extensively. The enterprise nature of the Optim platform is really what has driven its success and its market share over the years. What we find is that Optim can interoperate with data on any storage device, on any operating system, on any database or file structures, both legacy and modern, and across a wide range of packaged applications with out-of-the-box support. The yellow ones here are Optim supported by IBM. The green ones are out-of-the-box templates offered by partners. And that's the whole platform that we see customers standardizing, particularly for in a factory type model for test data management, data privacy on the one hand, and increasingly for application retirement on the other hand. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit we're seeing with applications that are becoming obsoleted, perhaps by new ERP implementations, with lots of applications that can then be retired and a lot of money saved. We are doing quite a number of those factory-type models today. So to wrap up, there are real benefits in using Hadoop today. Customers are starting to move out of the sandbox into real-world implementations, and increasingly now are having to pay attention to enterprise data management and information lifecycle governance of that data. Hadoop can be used in that context for test data management, as Peter was describing, making testing more agile and nimble, and privatizing that data so that it's secure during the testing and development, QA, and education processes, given that it's a different set of users that typically gets access to that data. But over time, we also see that Hadoop is going to become the standard repository for corporate archive data as well. And Jeff talked a little bit about how it's possible to move archive files from Optim into the Hadoop repository for managing that data through to the end of its life, supporting those initiatives and helping with compliance. That's our story for today, and we're going to stop now and open it up for questions. For those of you who are with us in the audience, there is a question tab on the right-hand side of your screen that you can use to send us questions. And let me take a look at what questions we have and see what we might do before we wrap up. Okay, here's one question. Let me address this to Jeff first. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of adoption we're seeing so far with Hadoop, Jeff, among IBM customers?
Sure. So what I'm seeing from my perspective is more about being able to make sure that your archived information can be included in broader analytics initiatives. So what they're essentially doing is taking that archived data, they're using our HDFS loaders, and are making that information available for the analytics that they're performing. And then once they complete that, they essentially remove that data back off of that platform, and then, of course, repeat the cycle as needed when they need to take a look at the archived information from an analytics perspective. And I guess the real important point here is that really what's being facilitated is, number one, first and foremost, is you could certainly move a multitude of data if you needed to for faster response times or more in-depth analysis that maybe SQL isn't going to provide to you alone. But secondly, and probably more importantly, is making sure that that information is being analyzed with other corporate information so that you can start to yield results that you wouldn't be able to find if it was just standalone. So that's pretty much the patterns that I see today. I know that there are some others that, you know, they're looking at the platform and trying to determine if they can actually just maintain the information, right, and be able to govern it in the Hadoop container itself. There are some initiatives that are coming out now that we are very much watching and being involved in as needed. Atlas is one project that just came out that is basically in an incubation phase right now that is looking to govern the information that goes into the platform. And as those kinds of things begin to emerge, we'll certainly stick with that and embrace the concepts and certainly help to move those projects along as we see that it needs to be moved.
Peter, would you comment on what you're seeing with customers in the test data management area so far?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Jeff said. We tend to see more people wanting to try analytics applications initially with their test data management, which is kind of an interesting and complicated thing to do, really, because you don't necessarily think of your test organization as having as much interest as other places in your organization. But it's been very interesting for me to see, for example, one large insurance company, the testers come to us and say, you know, we think we know our data better than the business analysts because we see all the we see all the data. And we have to pull out subsets for testing, and we understand, you know, we've been using this Hadoop and big data to query to understand basically the, you know, distributions of you know, what kind of products our customers have, how they differ from state to state or location in the country. You know, they have actually made some very interesting statements to me about feeling that they understand their data better than some of their business analysts do. So certainly a big emphasis on analytics and analytics in terms of the use case, the test data management. We're seeing that in some of our earliest adopters, and these are people who are willing to, you know, to say that their test effort deserves as much resource as other aspects of their development process, and to make the Hadoop environment available to their testers just as well as to their developers. And they're seeing some real rewards from doing that, from doing analytics on test data. So, you know, I would second what Jeff said by saying that we too are seeing primary use cases in that analytics area, and some secondary use of Hadoop as a, you know, a less expensive place to keep large volumes of test data.
Thanks, Peter. Along those lines, let me ask you, next question is, does Optim support other big data Hadoop environments in addition to Hive?
So it's possible to do this. The primary support for Optim test data management and the archiving tool is in the Hive environment. It's possible with data privacy, as I mentioned before, to do data privacy in other ways. For example, as I previously mentioned with DataStage with our ETL tool, so that, you know, you can use DataStage jobs that while in Hadoop, you could do masking of data in Hadoop. But our primary focus has been on the Hive environment due to its similarity to the relational models outside. Jeff, do you have anything to add on that?
I can't think of anything, Peter.
Okay, next question. Is the data masking feature that we're talking about available for use with unstructured data? Peter, do you want to try that one first?
Yeah, sure. So, so there's two answers, yes and no, as usual with all questions. So, you know, the easiest and most direct support that Optim provides is for data in structured environments. We do support semi-structured data in XML, for example, through database techniques, typically. So the data we rely on or allow the database to, to help in those cases, and customers make use of our user-defined functions, for example, to be able to do that directly in SQL, which can then be included in XML processing inside of the database. So those, I think, would qualify as semi-structured. As far as unstructured, we have a Guardium data redaction tool, which allows you to mask data using the Optim masking in unstructured data, where it can do things like optical character recognition on a memo, and then process some parts of those forms, perhaps with an Optim masking function. But I would have to say that most of our attention has gone into the masking of structured data.
Let me add to that a little bit. We, as implementers, see this use case that Peter's describing more and more frequently now. It happens quite a bit in packaged applications where there are blobs and clobs in the database that contain documents of various types, unstructured data, and we are seeing customers with the requirement for masking or redacting that data along with the structured data. We have a project right now that we're in POC on with the Curum application, package application that's owned by IBM and is used by large government agencies in the health and welfare area, and that application does have a number of blobs and clobs embedded in the database, and we are doing a bit of add-on plug-in functionality that allows you to parse the data in those blobs and clobs based on the values, the structured data values that are associated with them, and do consistent masking of the structured and unstructured data together. So it's a more complicated use case, but we have found ways to enhance Optim with external plug-in tools to do that. And I think we're going to see more of that kind of functionality going forward.
Thank you. Let me just add, that's a really good point. Let me just add that it's one of the design goals of the Optim data privacy, the masking capability, to have it be open. We ship the function, basically as callable DLLs. If you want to write your own programs or call Optim data masking, we certainly are trying to keep the product entirely open in the ability to call those functions. And then we are working to add it to sort of more common data movement tools like data stage that I mentioned before, or maybe a DB2 high performance unload type tool, or anytime you're moving data from point A to point B, there's an opportunity for a tool to do masking while moving the data, for example. So what Mark has said is, it just reflects one of our design goals there, is to allow customers to build masking capability, either to use it in commonly used tools or, if necessary, to build it themselves. So we certainly don't like making people build it themselves, but we try to allow that to be possible.
Well, and I do think that is working. Those design goals are in fact already partially implemented, and we are using them to mask SAP, for example, and other custom applications where in-place masking is required. So it's a real extension of the product that's welcome. A couple more quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. Jeff, question for you. Will IBM migrate its Optim archive repository to Hadoop over time, do you think?
So that's a great question. I think we're certainly looking at it, and I guess the right answer here is I don't know, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because there's so many different things that an archive container has to meet in terms of different projects. I can see that for as controls come into place for immutability and for data access control, as long as those types of security things come into place and it's common to the repository, as well as being able to ensure some kind of lifecycle management over that container, then yes, I certainly can see the benefits of using that as a container for a system of record. But there's some other challenges that we come up against too, things like regulations, especially in the financial sector where there's some regulatory mandates that say that archived data or transactions have to be stored on worm-type devices. So I think it's a matter of how this system matures, how the container matures, how quickly that's happening. Then we'll start to take advantage of the capabilities that are in there, even help to influence some of the capabilities that are emerging inside of the container to help it become a system of record. So I think for a lot of use cases, yes, we will be able to look at Hadoop at some point and be able to store some information there. I'm not so certain that it's going to be all information, especially in light of the fact that some regulations state that you have to store data a certain way, and that container, may not be able to provide those capabilities. So yes and no, I guess, is the right answer here. But the container does have to mature over time, which I'm sure it will. I do remember back in the days of J2E when that was first getting off the ground. How quickly that started to be developed and become more of a commodity or a platform for enterprises. I would see that Hadoop and HDFS platforms could take a similar role and be used as a repository at some point.
Well, thanks for the thorough answer. I know it's of interest to quite a number of our customers, and appreciate the complexity that you're dealing with here. One last question, Jeff. Do you want to comment a little bit about the recent IBM Spark initiative and whether that has an impact at all on Optim in terms of archiving strategy?
Sure. So Spark is very much an engine that IBM is investing in. It definitely has the areas where its application is very useful. Spark usage, it depends on the data set that you have, what kind of volume are you going to pump through it? Do you need to interact with large volumes of data and basically have some kind of UI for data shaping, for example? So Spark and its use, I think, is dependent on the application itself. And, we reside inside of a big data container, and the execution engine there is somewhat logical in that it'll determine whether it needs to use something like Spark or just straight MapReduce processes for batch processing. We'll certainly play a role there and be able to take advantage of that. Today, we are not looking at Spark as an execution engine specifically for any of the Optim processes, but certainly we can see our data being leveraged, within Spark for the right load and the right kind of analysis in the big data containers.
Very good. Thank you so much. That brings to an end our webinar for today. I really want to thank my colleagues in IBM Optim Product Management, Peter and Jeff. Great job. This is recorded. We also will be sending the slides out to all the attendees and registries, and we'll be following up with you afterwards. Thanks so much. Have a great day.